Hello, and welcome to our training on incorporating trauma-informed care into the CARE Act. This is part of a training series for behavioral health agencies and other implementation teams on incorporating trauma-informed care. The first session, we talked about what is trauma-informed care, what does that look like? In this session, we're going to focus on what it looks like as we integrate trauma-informed care into the care process. So I want to highlight our speakers today. We are pleased to join by Dr. Hill and Dr. Rose, both with Health Management Associates. Dr. Hill is a nurse practitioner with more than 15 years of experience, specializing in adverse childhood experiences in trauma-informed care. Dr. Deborah Rose is a psychologist with a history of designing and scaling initiatives in behavioral health services. She's done work with social service agencies, behavioral health centers, care coordination, supported housing, and services for unhoused populations. So let's take a look at what we will be covering today. Like I said, we're really going to be focusing on how to integrate trauma-informed care into the care process, looking at considerations for the care process, how to approach outreach and engagement, and developing of care agreements, care plans, and psychiatric advance directives. Some learning objectives for today's session. Our goal is that by the end of this session, participants will have an increased ability to describe the points in the care process that might be traumatic or triggering for care respondents, and then list at least 3 potential actions that could reduce these triggers, and consider how you can incorporate a trauma-informed approach into how you are approaching care. So with that introduction, I'd love to turn the time over to Dr. Hill to remind us about trauma-informed care as we look at how to incorporate that into the care process. Dr. Hill?
Thank you so much, Patricia. You know, we've talked a lot about trauma-informed care, and we've talked a lot about how organizations and experiences either inadvertently or advertently can cause trauma. And so when we think about why it's important to have a lens of trauma-informed care when we deal with our care respondents, just think about the entire process of actually going to an organization, of going perhaps to a care court and talking about your situation, walking into the building. All of these things can really bring up all kinds of feelings in individuals. So how we prepare our care respondents, how we prepare ourselves using and remembering those pillars of trauma-informed care, of trust, transparency, collaboration, honesty, being truthful about what we're doing, and preparing to the best of our ability the individual for the care process and what to expect, helping individuals to step and walk into their own agency. So we're going to be talking about this over our time together, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Rose.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Karen. It's good to be here. Let's start, as we often do, with an example of somebody that you may encounter in the care process. This is a fictionalized account, but it may seem familiar to individuals that you've worked with or that you will work with. Let's talk about Angela. Angela is a 46-year-old woman. She has 2 young adult sons, both of whom she's estranged from, but she is looking forward to reconnecting with her sons as one of her goals. Angela was born and raised in another country, and Spanish is her primary language. She's very connected to her spirituality, her faith, to the church, and it's a place that she finds great comfort. Angela was raised in a home where she experienced domestic violence. She both witnessed it and personally experienced it. And as an adult, she has also been the recipient of violence, both in her own relationships and as a result of living on the street through untoward events. Right now, Angela isn't doing as well as she has in the past. She's no longer in a shelter, and she has been staying on the streets. She's been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and she's hearing voices that other people don't hear. Angela has been found eligible for the care process. And so I think it would be helpful to take a look at how someone like Angela and others may interact with care. So let's take a look at the care process. Next slide, please. So as we look at this slide, and I want to thank the LA County for sharing this image with us that they've created. This shows us a number of steps throughout the care proceedings. And all of these are opportunities that we can think about how to utilize trauma-informed care for Angela. On the left side of the screen, we have the care process initiation and engagement. How are we outreaching and connecting to Angela? How are we explaining what's going on? How are we making contact with her? How are we considering her triggers, what matters to her, her voice? In the middle of the slide, there are a number of court appearances, hearings that are identified. And as we think about those, how are we looking at the proceedings using a trauma-informed lens to support Angela through those proceedings? And then to the right of the slide, when we look at what's the delivery package that's put together, what kind of services are we identifying and securing for Angela to thrive successfully and independently in the community, we think about the trauma-informed lens and its application of what matters to her. What is her preferences, her wishes for those services? What are her priorities? What are her goals? And how can we support all of those things in that care agreement or care plan that's being developed? Why don't we take a look at the next slide? And here, again, the initial part is the outreach and in the engagement during the process. I think it's really important that when we consider our initial contact, our early contact with the member who is being identified, that we recognize multiple opportunities for triggers for individuals. And these just aren't folks who experience adverse reactions in their or adverse events in their childhood or in their adult life. These are individuals who, by the very nature of living with a significant mental illness, the stigma that's associated with it, the loss of relationships that accompany it, are experiencing very real current trauma. So we think about the different ways that people can be affected through our engagement. Certainly strangers, people who are in uniforms, police officers or other uniformed personnel, the authority figures that are coming at somebody who may be very well intended, wanting to offer support and engagement. These can be very jarring for folks who have experienced any kind of trauma. And so when we consider how we approach somebody about the CARE Act, let's think about some of the ways that you can use trauma-informed care. Maybe learn a little bit more about the person before. What language do they prefer speaking? Is there any foods that we can introduce in that initial visit? Are there other things that you've heard the person enjoys that you may be able to have a nonverbal connection and just spend a couple of moments or longer engaging with the individual? Certainly thinking about how can you offer services at the beginning and explain the care process to help somebody feel more informed and empowered about their involvement. Last, this is really an opportunity to think about the approaches, and we've talked about these in earlier presentations, utilizing motivational interviewing to learn about the person, ask open-ended questions, listen, withhold judgment, and really validate the person's unique experience so that we are protective in a way to not re-traumatize the individual in this proceeding. Karen, I wonder if there's other thoughts that you have about how we might apply trauma-informed care.
Thank you, Deborah. I do have some thoughts about the care process and about the outreach and engagement process. If we use a trauma-informed lens, that's really the equivalent of centering Angela and her needs. And so when we think about those pillars, trust and honesty, all of those things, they've been broken. And so you have to remember that it may take more than one outreach. It may take more than one engagement. We could pretty much be assured of the fact that other people have approached Angela and promised all kinds of things. They may have promised things not being honest, and she ended up being held against her will 5150. So those are all things that could make her very, very wary of wanting to engage with somebody that she doesn't know. One of the things you might want to think about doing is, could we engage her volunteer supporter to come with us? Could we talk with the volunteer supporter and have her go with us to let Angela know that we're okay? There's lots of ways to think about this. It's really consistency, honesty, being present and continuing to come back, and really letting her know that you are going to do the best that you can do for her. Making sure you don't overpromise in your outreach engagement, that you're going to absolutely change her life. You're going to help her through the process, and you're going to support her with helping her to make the best decisions that she can for herself. And back to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate those ideas. And the idea of a volunteer supporter involving people who may just naturally be a support to people like Angela, a friend, a family member, a peer, somebody who they identify as a source of strength for them, I think really does make sense to bring in as soon as possible. Let's continue to move forward a little through trauma-informed care as we consider the court hearings and the court process. Again, on the left side of the screen, we're just identifying a couple of junctures where the individual may be involved in a courtroom or in a court proceeding. And the highlight here is that courtrooms are triggering for most of us. Most of us walking into a courtroom would feel appropriately anxious, overwhelmed. It can be very stressful and intimidating in the best of circumstances. So I think it's really important that we recognize that even though this isn't a criminal court, it feels punitive to a lot of people, especially those who have experienced any kind of trauma in their life. And so a couple of opportunities, I think, in this juncture is to help explain the court process, put it into writing, share pictures. Please do it in a language that the person feels most comfortable speaking or reading. Involve them in the different options, walk them through a courtroom. Ask questions about their experience, be partners, ask who they would like to join them through this process, whether it's a supporter, voluntary supporter, a family, or a friend. We talk about the black robe effect, the impact that the judge has on proceedings, and it's been pretty well established through multiple specialty courts that an order from the judge, the impact of the person in the robe, often leads towards more adherence to medications, to treatment that are ordered by the judge. And so the impact of that black robe is known. And so with that in mind, helping the individual to understand what their role is in the court, who the judge is, what they might experience. And I do think that there's an opportunity here for behavioral health departments in particular, that as you are partnering with your courts, to look at the opportunity to create venues that are more friendly, less adversarial. Again, the legislature talks about, unless it is a contested issue, we don't have to be in a formal courtroom. And so to look at creating scenarios where people can go through the CARE Act proceedings in a way that feels more user-friendly.
If this is so traumatizing and so triggering for Angela, we can also share with her that she doesn't have to be present. She can hear everything that happened afterwards. She could have a representative go for her, go to court, and to, as long as her wishes are made known. If it's going to be something that really kind of sets her off, it might be better for her to sit this one out and perhaps go to another one. So that's often, or can be, a strategy as well. Now I'll pass it back to you, Deborah.
Thank you for adding that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to your point, it's a great opportunity to pull in people that Angela or folks like Angela, who they trust to represent them and to support them through the process. Let's take a look at a few of the outcomes of some of these proceedings, including the care agreement, the care plan, and eventually a graduation plan, and think about where we can use a trauma-informed approach in those activities. Mentioned earlier motivational interviewing, and the development of all of these plans can certainly be embraced by utilizing motivational interviewing, asking open-ended questions, affirming the person's response, withholding judgment, so that you can hear the person's voice, preferences, goals, wishes. I think it's essential that folks who have experienced trauma or folks who have been unengaged in services, this is the opportunity to really involve that person and empower them as participants in their own care plan and in their own care agreement. It's an aspect of recovery that's absolutely essential to, promote success and independence. And so when we think about what's going into a care agreement or a care plan, involving that person, what are their hopes? What are their wishes? What are their goals? Where would they like to receive services? Do they have a preference of agencies or locations? Certainly, if there's meds involved, do they have a preference in what kind of meds are given, what venue the meds are given, by whom meds and prescriptions are provided? Perhaps somebody does have a preference for an IM over oral meds. Lots of opportunities here to think about how you can support the individual in sharing his or her own voice, certainly choosing a voluntary supporter to be identified on the care agreement or the care plan, a way of really considering the trauma-informed approach in this planning. Another way is to think about the supported decision-making approach, and this is very much in line with what we're talking about is supportive decision making. We do have a couple of other presentations about that if you do want to look at another point. Supportive decision making really, again, promotes self-determination, autonomy, helps the individual make decisions, express decisions, share priorities and desires, so that we can have those things reflected in what's documented in a care agreement or a care plan. So let's take a look at how trauma-informed care can be brought into psychiatric advance directives and how psychiatric advance directives can be brought into a trauma-informed lens. Psychiatric advance directions are a legal document that details and articulates specific instructions, preferences, wishes, decisions about an individual's treatment and care. It's generally created at a time where that person has the ability to make informed decisions, where, as I just mentioned earlier, an example, what type of medication he or she would prefer, who in the individual's life they would like to be involved. If there's a need for a hospitalization or an intervention, what are the preferences? What are the goals? Where might somebody want to receive services? Lots of other things that could be used in that as well. If somebody has pets or other relationships that are of value to them, how are those relationships and managed? So this is a form that is really an opportunity to ensure that the individual's voice is heard, that they are empowered, that there's autonomous decision making, and that the individual's preferences are recognized at a time where maybe somebody isn't able to give informed consent or express their desire. Psychiatric advance directives are a great tool to keep in the arsenal for when you're working with somebody who is experiencing a crisis. And we certainly encourage that these are introduced to your clients or to the individuals that you're serving and reintroduced. These are documents that can be created early in the care proceedings. They should certainly be revisited, reconfirmed, and they can be a living document that evolves as the individual does.
You know, Deborah, I want to add one thing, a couple things on. You did a wonderful job on care agreements and plans and the psychiatric advance directive. All of these things may require that we have conversations about how the CARE Act process is different than any other interaction Angela has had with prior. So how it's different, that it's more compassionate, that we're taking her needs and considerations into view, that what she thinks matters. And so sometimes this is going to be elicit her stress response because she's going to remember past experiences. She's had agreements before. The whole word of the term of care plan is not new to her. It's part of our job to explain to her how this is different, how the psychiatric advance directive is different, how the care agreement that she makes through the CARE Act and in the care court is different. That judge is a different individual. So prepare yourself as you listen to this to remember that you're going to have to reinforce that this is different than her experience in the past, so that she'll be willing, or whoever you're working with will be willing to try something new and to trust the process. And as Deborah has said so many times before, and I think it's really, really important, having trusted individuals around who can support what you're saying while you're building your trust relationship with Angela is going to be crucial in the process. So that's really what I wanted to say before we moved on to the next slide. Thank you.
Great addition. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next slide and take a look, as we always do, on ideas in action. What are some things that you can do? What are some things that we can do in the immediate to incorporate material that we're talking about and learning? And in this case, how can we incorporate trauma-informed approaches into the care processes, the CARE Act, the care agreement for people like Angela? And so, Karen, I'm wondering if we would like to take a moment together and think about some of the things that might be triggering for Angela and how we can apply some of these principles.
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking, let's remember that Angela has had that a legal process, and she was evicted from her home. So this whole thing about court may think, oh my God, I went through that. That was so awful. As I said before, it's important to share with her that this is different. This is a different kind of court proceeding. It may be held in a different venue. It may be held someplace different, maybe even taking her there so that she feels comfortable with seeing the place and how it's going to feel different. Remember that English is not her first language. Let's find out if she wants the proceedings to be done in English, or does she want them to be done in Spanish. She has a choice over that, and we can make sure that that happens, that somebody is writing down what happens so that she has sort of a living transcript a bit, if for lack of a better word, of what really happened. Sometimes we get into these situations and you walk out and you can't even remember what was even happening. So perhaps take notes and have a debrief after it's over, and a prep before you go in to make sure that she's ready. Some things to do is make sure that Angela has slept the night before, that she's had a breakfast before she goes, that she feels as comfortable if she decides to go to the court hearing, that she feels as comfortable as she can and has as much support around her as necessary. Authority may intimidate her, and so prepare her for that. She may not like the idea of having anybody tell her what to do, feeling trapped in that sense. So there's all of these things I think are important. And just to remember to prepare yourself, make sure that you're ready to handle perhaps a triggered Angela, and that you have some tools in your toolbox to help her, some deep breathing, a little short walk before you go, a relaxation exercise before you walk in, some things that you can pull out of your toolbox, and some things that perhaps you've been working with Angela so that she can pull out. If she feels herself getting nervous, some things that she can do to calm herself down. We've talked a lot about music, or maybe she likes tea, or that she's hydrated. All of these things will make a difference, I think, and be a trauma-informed approach. Back to you, Deborah.
Thanks, Karen. Great contribution. Really thinking about Angela and her whole experience, a holistic perspective. So I want to thank folks who joined us today and who are listening to this, and encourage you to implement a couple ideas in action of how you might use the trauma-informed lens as you're working with people like Angela and others. And I am going to return to my colleague, Patricia.
Thank you, Dr. Rose and Dr. Hill, for sharing your thoughts about how we can incorporate trauma-informed care into the care process. Our goal by the end of this session was that participants will have an increased ability to describe the points in the care process that might be triggering or traumatic for care respondents. Dr. Hill and Dr. Rose talked about the court proceedings, the engagement process, the care planning, all those points that could bring up past trauma, and then describe some of those potential actions that you could do or encourage others do to reduce these triggers. So I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts related to actions that we can take. A couple next steps we wanted to highlight. Please continue to visit the CARE Act website for more resources and trainings. Deborah mentioned a training on supported decision-making. We have a few different resources there for you to use there in better understanding that approach. We also have our other series on trauma-informed care. So we have both a series for volunteer supporters to better understand how trauma-informed care can fit into their work, and also the present series for behavioral health agencies and other members of the implementation team. So an introduction to trauma-informed care and organizational considerations. We also have a training on workforce and sustainability with trauma-informed care, and that is geared towards those doing the work and how they can create resiliency and sustainability for the work that they're doing, and some approaches that they can take when experiencing vicarious or secondary trauma of participating in this work. We also wanted to share how you can get in contact with us. So like we mentioned, the CARE Act website is always a good place, but there really is no wrong door. If you want to send out an email to this email address, so info@careact.org, we can route you to the appropriate person and help provide some TA resources. And then we also wanted to highlight another training on psychiatric advanced directives that we did. And this is really an innovative approach. It's different from advanced health directives and can really create a creative space for how you approach PADS as part of the care process. We thank you for your time, and please reach out if you have any questions.